What is up, everybody? Welcome, PCP Army. Welcome, everybody, to Pop Culture Philosophers Station. Tonight is a very exciting conversation that we're having. Here's Brian. What's up, Brian?
Hey, guys. How's it going? Station.
Nice. Station. Yeah, thank you so much for that. I appreciate, Brian, when you jump in on the station bit, because I was a that was you tried a little too hard with that station, but it's okay. You can never try too hard with the station. Y'all, let me tell you something. We are so freaking excited because one of my absolute favorite comic book creators is here today to chat with us. The writer of these three comics, for instance, are three of the best comics I've read in the last 5 years. These Savage Shores, Blue and Green, GRAFITY'S WALL. The writer of the brand new The Swamp Thing #1, which just released this week. It was my pick of the week. Y'all, you know him, you love him. Welcome him to the channel with a hearty station. It's Rom V.
Hey, everyone.
Thank you so much for being here. We're big fans of your work. Everybody in the PCP Army out there, I'm a big fan. Swamp Thing was my pick of the week, and it wasn't because that was an agreement we had where Rom's like, yo, I'll be on the show, but it's got to be your pick of the week. That's not what happened. So I want to ask you the first question, which is the question everybody's been really wanting to know. What do you do? What's your routine to just maintain the most beautiful hair we have ever seen in the comic industry?
I'm gonna give you the most disappointing answer possible. It's good genetics. My dad's 75 and he still has a full head of long flowing hair, so I do nothing to it. That's the best way.
That's even more impressive. It really, really is. Now, big fan of your work though. How excited are you, and how have you been dealing with the launch of Swamp Thing #1? This is like your first DC #1 launch, right? And like,
yeah.
It seems like a lot of people are responding very positively to it. How does that make you feel?
Yeah, it's good. I mean, it's a little bit weird in that I tend to immediately lose interest in my books right after I've finished working on them. And then usually I will have finished working on something, months before it actually comes out.
Yeah.
And then it'll come out and people will react to it, and there'll be this kind of second wave of like, and so it's kind of been like that. The book came out and slowly people started tweeting about it, talking about it, writing their views on it. And it's really nice to see kind of people adding their own interpretations to it, and people picking up on some of the things I dropped in there. And people finding things I didn't intend to drop in there as well. And I think that's kind of the nature of telling interesting stories, and I really enjoy that.
I loved it. Are you it feels like you have at least read and absorbed a lot of the Alan Moore stuff. Is that a big influence on this run?
It is, to an extent. I think there's both a danger and as a thrill to kind of saying that it's a big influence on the run, in that the dangerous part is that Alan Moore did a lot with Swamp Thing.
Yeah.
And I don't mean a lot just in terms of number of issues. I mean, like, he went to a lot of different places with Swamp Thing. And that's the sign of an amazing imagination and the ability to tell different kinds of stories. And so that makes it that much harder to say, I'm going to do a new Swamp Thing, because then the question is, are there stories left to tell? Where are you going to take it that it hasn't gone before? But also that's the challenge. And so that's the thrill, to be influenced by someone like Alan Moore and go like, okay, well, I'm going to take what you did. I'm going to take the thematic essence of what you did, but I'm going to do something different with it.
Nice. Where did the idea come up for a new host? Was that you? Was that DC? How did that come about?
So originally, when I started talking to them about this book, it was supposed to be part of their 5G kind of initiative. And really the way that came about is they said, what do you want to do? Here's everything that's on the table. What do you want to do? And I said, look, I want to pitch you Swamp Thing, but I want to pitch you an Indian guy as Swamp Thing, and not Alec Holland. And this is what I want to do with it. I gave them kind of a bigger picture plan and the personal drama involved in it and all of that. And most of the editors came back and they said, wow, you really killed it with the pitch. So, I mean, I think DC was also on board from the very beginning in terms of what I was trying to do. I think it tied in and it fit in really nicely with this character, because the argument to getting a new host or avatar of the Green was not made by me. It was made by Alan Moore.
Yeah.
Because I think one of the early issues, Swamp Thing buries Alec Holland's bones. So all I had to do was put that in my pitch and go like, look, it's time to bury Alec Holland's bones and progress and progress forward from it and say something new, because this character has the ability to outlive himself, has the ability to outlive his own avatars. And so there has to be something more to say there.
Absolutely. Brian, you got any thoughts on Swamp Thing or any questions?
Well, yeah, I was like, one of the things I love about your writing is how dense it is, and that because that 2-issue story you did with Swamp Thing, I thought had a lot in it, for only 2 issues. I mean, it really packed a punch. So, I think you're definitely carrying on Alan Moore's legacy, really well. And you mentioned, kind of the change in the genres. That was one thing I picked up on and going back, and reading back to your catalog. Is that how hard is that for to swap genres and things like that? Because it's like, I mean, you're pretty adept at it. Jumping from all these different genres, and it's really cool to watch.
I think that is a result of kind of reading widely and experiencing stories widely. Like I appreciate on one level the idea of being a fan of a genre. I like sci-fi. I just like good stories, and so I grew up reading all kinds of stories. I grew up reading fantasy. I grew up reading sci-fi. Grew up reading fantasy sci-fi, kind of that I qualified Dune as fantasy sci-fi. And then I grew up reading like Stanislav Lem and the Strugatsky brothers, which is more hardcore sci-fi. And so the point of saying that is very early on, I started understanding that the hallmarks of good stories, there are fundamental reasons why stories work and how they're structured and how they're shaped. And those things work across genre. And so if you understand those, then it's really entertaining going like, okay, I'm going to tell the story of, a man's marriage breaking down, but I'm going to tell it in, Viking history while he's on a quest to kill a dragon, versus I'm going to tell the story of a man's marriage breaking down because he is on the moon terraforming it, and he hasn't been physically present to see his family in years. They're both interesting stories, but the fundamental is understanding relationships and understanding how our commitments to each other work. And I think that's kind of why I'm able to shift between genres.
That's really nice. I was wondering, when you start coming up with your ideas and when you're starting to craft the story, what's more important to focus on first? Like, where does it lead from? Is it the plot? Is it the subtext? Or is it the character?
I mean, it's very hard to compartmentalize it like that, because they all kind of bleed into each other. But a kind of litmus test I use, and I prescribe this to other writers sometimes when they're talking to me, they're like, I'm not sure how this works, is, let go of all the fireworks, let go of all the frills, take out the spaceships, take out the, time travel, all of that stuff. And then look at your story and go like, does it still work? So I think when you do that, all you're left with is probably character, a little bit of theme, and most importantly, like a human conflict. Like, you should be trying to answer one of those kind of existential questions through your work. And if you start doing that, you could be writing about, 2 people on a date, or you could be writing about a swamp creature on a different planet. You'll still tell a good story.
Yeah. Last year when we had Alex on the show, he said that when he started working with you and the others in the White Noise, he started learning how important the characters were. and like to start like thinking about that. And I just really wanted to ask because that was super freaking cool. Well, we're really super giddy to have you here. In case you don't notice, man. So
it's my pleasure to be here.
It is our pleasure to have you. Well, why comics? Why are you working in comics? And obviously, if people don't know, Rom is also a hell of an artist as well. But so what is it about comic books that appeals to you, and why are you working right now in comics?
I mean, it wasn't. I say it wasn't a conscious decision. No, it was a conscious decision, but it wasn't something that I had intended to do when I started off writing, to be honest. I've been drawing a lot longer than I've been writing, to be perfectly honest with that too. I started drawing when I was a kid. I remember copying He-Man stickers when I was a kid. So comics and that kind of pop culture, the animated shows have been around me ever since I was a kid. And so it was never a thing that was disconnected from me, but I stopped reading comics for a really long time. Like when I was growing up, I read mostly European stuff, Phantom, Mandrake, Flash Gordon, those comics, and then Tintin and Asterix, Calvin and Hobbes. And so those were the things I grew up reading. And then I stopped reading them for a while because my dad took all of my comics and went, "No, you need to read proper books." And he gave me Steinbeck, and I got really depressed.
As one does.
But yeah, no. So I went through college kind of not reading much of comics, but I was reading everything else. And then I was 19 and I'd moved to the States to study chemical engineering. And a friend of mine at the time kind of gifted me the first volume of Sandman for my birthday. And that kind of blew my mind as soon as I read it. And I had to read more. So I picked up all the other volumes and went through all of them. And just really fell down this Vertigo rabbit hole at that point. I realized I didn't discover Alan Moore until after I had read Neil Gaiman. So I read everything Neil Gaiman did, and then I read somewhere that Alan Moore had recommended Neil Gaiman to Karen Berger when he started off at Vertigo. And so I picked up. I said, okay, let's find out what Alan Moore did. And then I read all of Alan Moore. Then went on to Ennis, Ellis, Morrison, Azzarello, Brubaker, all of those guys. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question. That's kind of why I fell into writing comics. The writing decision came much later. I quit chemical engineering when I was in 2013, and I just started writing because it had been a hobby for a really long time. I'd been writing since I was 12 or so, and I was writing prose short stories, and someone came up to me and they said, "You have a really visual style. Well, you should try writing comics." And I said, "Okay, cool, I'll write a comic." I wrote a comic in India. It did really well. It was called Aghori. Then I moved to the UK to study creative writing. I wrote another comic called Black Mamba, which I kickstarted and self-published, and that did really well. And that opened a lot of doors for me. And I did Parody So the year after that. And then I did The Savage Shores, and I did my first DC short story the year after. No, I did Grafity'S Wall the year after that. And then The Savage Shores and my work on Batman Secret Files. And then you've read everything since then.
Yeah, the first one I ever noticed was The Savage Shores. And that book just blew me away. Like the whole first wave of White Noise releases from Vault. Like it was timed with me discovering Vault and then discovering y'all's work. So when did White Noise, when did that come into the picture? How did that start forming?
That happened before I published Black Mamba, to be honest. I had, 5 or 10 Xerox copied pages of this black and white crime noir book that I was carting around trying to show to people and going like, what do you think I should do with this? And so I walked into Thought Bubble in 2015, and I knew of Ryan O'Sullivan through, internet exchanges and forums, and they were like, "Hey, I'm writing some scripts too." Ryan was like, "Hey, I'm going to be at Thought Bubble. You should come meet me." he's gonna hate me for saying this, but he used to wear a fedora back then, so it was really it's really easy to spot him. But I met him, and then Ryan introduced me to Dan Waters and Casper Wingard, who had just put out Limbo at that point. Those guys are amazing. And so very early on, kind of my entry into comics was with these super creative, super interesting people. And then as we started talking, which, you know, involves a fair bit of what I think is wrong with comics today.
Yeah.
As we started talking, we realized that all of us were going like, where is that progression from that era of Vertigo? Like, where are the comic books that were born out of those? And it almost felt like somewhere there had been a wall, and we just stopped making those kinds of comics. And so very early on, part of our endeavor was to go like, I want to do comics that are weird and interesting and literary and unabashedly so. And I think that was kind of the genesis of White Noise. Alex was the last to join because he was not there at that convention, but we met him at London SuperCon, I think a year later. And Dan, who had known him for a while, was like, he is cut from the same cloth. Come meet him and say hi and all of that. So.
Yeah, that's all. It's really cool that you say that, because I've said so many, like that British invasion that they call it from the 80s and 90s, where Moore and Morrison and Gaiman, and then, you know, Ellis and Ennis and Milligan and all of them come in. I'm like, it feels like we've had some great creators since then, the Jonathan Hickmans, the Ed Brubakers, but y'all really feel like you're putting an influx amongst other people. Your James Tynians, your Michael Morisi's, like, they're really doing some really cool, like you said, weird, interesting literary stuff that you can sink your teeth into. And comic books for a while just became cinematic and popcorn, you know, and it's nice to see, I don't know, a thinking person's comic. And I think that's what you guys do at White Noise. And so on behalf of everybody here at the PCP Army, we want to say thank you for that. 100%. Y'all do amazing work. Brian, this is the Brian bit, by the way. This is when I toss it over to Brian and say, Brian, let's go.
Hey. Well, yeah, I did want to take it back a little bit. I did find a copy of Black Mamba, and
excellent.
But now I actually have some of your art, because the one I found had the sketch in there. So that was one of the, I guess it's actually two questions, but I was wondering if you were going to entertain doing commissions ever again or anytime. And also, have you entertained, drawing your own comic?
Well, I did a piece of art in Black Mamba. One of the full page pieces in the back of that book is drawn by me and lettered by Aditya. But to be honest, that one, like sequential work is a whole other beast. And there's a lot of work that goes into it. And, you know, I'm one of those guys who is, with my writing, I can go like, okay, I'm riffing with the stuff that I'm reading. I'm enjoying it. I'm playing in the same space of the kind of things that I enjoy. Whereas with art, I'm so far behind the kind of stuff that I enjoy that if I started working on my own stuff, I'd just hate it. I'd be like, no, this is terrible. So I think some things have to stay hobbies, so I don't get so worked up about, you know, messing up a piece of art every once in a while. So I guess the answer to that is I do take commissions every once in a while. I do sketches for people, not so much off late because I've been working on a lot of books, but yeah, if it were to come down to me drawing and writing my own book, I think everyone would have to wait for years until I got happy with what I was drawing before I tried to do that.
Well, I was thinking, I mean, you've got, you know, such a good visual understanding of things. Do you inject that into your scripts? Do you like try to, provide a lot of information on the panel layouts when you're doing the scripts, or? Yeah,
I do sometimes. Much either to the enjoyment or the chagrin of my artists. Right. But I always say that, look, this is a suggestion. This is what is in my head. And I totally understand that, whatever's in your head could be 10 times cooler, in which case do that. Don't do this. And so, but I do put sketches, I do put layout ideas into my scripts. And I think there is a marked benefit to doing that, because if you're trying to describe an idea that's in your head, the reason it's in your head is because whatever it is a paler thing that comes out of your mouth when you put it into words. Mm-hmm. And I think that's part of the endeavor of writing, is to try and articulate something that is very difficult to articulate. And so it would take me, an essay to articulate a very intricate layout, whereas it'll take me 5 minutes to sketch it out. Sure. And so I will just send the sketch. And the guys that I work with, people especially who I've worked with for a while, people like Sumit or Anand, all of these guys, when I send them layouts, they're like, oh, that's what you meant. Okay, cool. And so there is that welcoming sense of like, okay, I get that you have a strong visual sense of what you want to do. Same thing with Mike Perkins, who's, I was surprised. He's been around for so long. He's done so much work. I was super nervous. I was like, Mike, don't think poorly of me, but can I totally just scribble on a piece of paper and send it to you? And he was like, yeah, send everything to me. And now I'm just sending him Photoshop layouts. I'm like, this is what I want to do.
Now he's like, oh no, not again.
What have I done?
That's awesome. You do work with a lot of the same people over and over, and I really appreciate hearing you say their names correctly, because I butcher people's names all the time. So that's awesome. I want to know a little bit about the process between Blue and Green, because obviously it's very influenced by jazz music. And to me, and I'm not an aficionado of jazz music whatsoever, okay? But it feels to me like you're intentionally, y'all are going from a structured thing back to like a more improvised nature, and then back to like, it feels to me like what I perceive jazz music to be. So I'm curious of how the process was and what the intent was.
Sure. I mean, to me, I think to understand the intent, you have to understand what I really enjoy about listening to jazz. And it's that, when you're listening to, don't get me wrong, I'm a blues guy. I play blues guitar. And when you're listening to rock and blues, once you've kind of got the scale and you've got the riff in your head, you know what that song is doing. You know where the next thing is going to go, where the chords are going. Every once in a while, you'll find something that surprises you. And so that's entertaining to me. But when I listen to jazz, part of the thing that excites me is I think the music's going to go to point A. And the really, really good jazz artists, they'll take it to point D.5. And I'll just be like, what did you do? That was amazing. And so I kind of wanted to infuse a little bit of that in the comic, where you never quite feel like you're on solid ground. You kind of feel like you're always in this, like your sense of time is affected, your sense of depth is affected, your sense of reality is constantly affected in the book. And so that's one part of what we wanted to do. The other thing that really we didn't plan on doing, but we realized very early on, is it just made more sense for me to see what Anand was doing with the pages before I went back to him with the next set of pages, if you will. And the more we started doing that, the more we realized that it just made sense for me to write a page, send it to him, for us to sit down and visually figure it out. He'll draw the page, I'll get it back, and then I'll write the next page based on what I've seen. And it kind of became this call and response improvisation. I had a bigger picture sense of where the story was going, but I hadn't outlined it. And it was a nerve-wracking but entertaining way of making the book, where we were just going, okay, we'll write this thing a page at a time.
Was it completely done before you pitched it? Because it seems like a hard pitch, right? You're like, oh, we don't really know what we're doing. We're just going to like run with it.
No, I mean, fortunately, with books like Paradiso and These Savage Shores, I'd gotten to a point where Image and Eric Stephenson realized that, okay, he knows what he's doing. And so when I went to him with this book, I had the first 5 to 10 pages, and he looked at it, and his only response was like, "Where do you find these guys?" Which I had to explain to him that Anand was the same artist on Grafity's Wall, and he was like, "What? That makes no sense." But
the style's completely different. Yeah. It's so wild.
Yeah. Anand's like one of these unrecognized masters, and I keep telling him part of the reason you're unrecognized is because you don't shout out about your own work. He's just not interested in, and I can respect that. Yeah. He just wants to do the work, and he just wants to make cool things, and he's getting to do that. But yeah, he's genuinely that cover for Black Mamba is painted by Anand.
Oh,
yeah, that's another, and he painted that on an actual piece of canvas, and you can walk into his home and look at that canvas and see the impasto technique where the hair on the dude's face is standing out a little like a 3D image on top of a canvas. So he's an immensely talented guy, and yeah, I mean, once you saw what Anand was doing and you had some idea of what I had done before, it wasn't really a hard pitch to make an image.
If I was Eric, I would have been like, whatever, dude, let's however many pages you want, we'll publish it. Let's do it. That's just me. But you're working with Anand again on Radio Apocalypse. Bueller's here, and he says Radio Apocalypse is going to be awesome. I agree. I haven't read anything yet, but I'm very excited. So, Ron, tell us a little bit about what that book is and when it's coming out.
Well, issue 1 will be out in April. And that book, I mean, I'm sure you've seen the spiel. If not, I'm sure you can find the spiel. So I'm not going to tell you about that, but I'll tell you how it came to me. I was one of those weird guys in college who had a mixtape for every occasion. It's like birthday, mixtape, friend, hanging out with friends, mixtape.
Yeah.
Dating someone, mixtape. And so I was thinking back to that time, and I was thinking about, like, okay, if the world were to end next week, what would I put on my mixtape? And I started thinking of these songs, and my brain just went to, what if I could tell a story based around each of these songs? And then it went to, okay, what if I could tell a story based on each of these songs, and the world is ending in the next week, month or so, whatever it is. And that's kind of where the genesis of this idea came from. The other thing I wanted to do, and which really interests me in comics, is trying to figure out how I can push the medium itself to do things that you wouldn't normally think of doing in comics, right? So like you wouldn't normally think of putting panels as per music notations in comics, but we have a spread in blue and green that's actually following the bass line from Lars Gulen's song. But you don't see it. It's not on the surface, but it's there in the way the panels are placed. And so with Radio Apocalypse, the thing I wanted to do is I write scripts while I listen to music all the time. And so I went, okay, I want people to read this comic while they're listening to music. And so there are places in the comic which will tell you what you should be listening to when you read them. And the idea is that every time you look at these images and you go, I spot a song there, you're supposed to put it on and then read the rest of the book. So,
that's so freaking dope.
Very exciting.
I got this story idea, and I'm structuring it around music too, of the time and whatnot. And because it was originally like supposed to be, I wrote it as a film script, and I put together the soundtrack. Like that shit really excites me. I'm very, very excited. That is a great segue to the next Brian bit, because Brian loves asking people about the music they listen to while they write.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, and I guess, since, you do a lot of, different genres and things like that. I mean, do you mix it up a lot? I mean, do you try to intentionally listen to specific pieces to write?
Yeah, I mean, I get people asking me all the time, like, what's the playlist for this thing you wrote? And if I actually showed them the playlist, they'd just be like, wow, that's a really weird mix of songs. And so it's less a playlist and more okay, I'm writing this scene, and this is the feeling of this scene, and this is a soundtrack that's in my head. I need to find something that sounds like this, and I'll spend hours looking for, which is a terrible way to do research. But I'll spend hours looking for the perfect soundtrack. But it's great because once I put it on, like the words will just flow. They will just come. And people keep the most common thing I hear about my writing, people go like, it's very poetic, it's very lyrical. Like, it's because I'm listening to music when I'm writing it. Yeah. Like the weirdest one is I've got a Carnage black, white, and red story in the Marvel April Carnage anthology. And as I was writing the idea for that, and I was explaining it to the editor, I made a reference to the Revenant, Alejandro Gonzalez Inarritu movie. And I just went, oh my God, I need to play that soundtrack while I write this. And so there's just hours of haunting music going on at my desk while I'm writing a Carnage story for some reason. So yeah.
Is that the Damon Albarn score? Did he do the score to that one? Or is that, I'm thinking of The Remnant. My bad. I'm thinking of The Remnant, I think.
No, The Revenant was Ryuichi Sakamoto. I think he's a Japanese pianist, composer.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he did the compositions for that.
Well, I'm really freaking excited to read that Carnage story now.
Well, yeah, it'll be out in April as well.
Heck yeah. We had a question from Kitten Puke. Love that name. He said, do you prefer Vault over the big two? And basically, do you prefer like the other publishers? Cause you got a book out from Boom coming up soon. Do you prefer doing that work because it's more like your own thing than working on someone else's character?
No, not really. I think they scratch different itches for me. Like, I want to create my own stories. I want to tell my own stories. I'm never letting go of that. But there's also a joy to kind of picking up from, hundreds of years of hundreds of people who've been telling stories before me and go like, okay, it's my turn now. I get to pick this up and run with it. So it's like a massive literary relay race.
Yeah,
I suppose. And so it's really, really interesting to tell stories that feel like they're part of that sort of larger tapestry and narrative.
Yeah.
Which, if you think about it, is how the great mythologies were born. So it's pretty cool to be able to pick at a thread which is part of some kind of modern mythology and just add your own voice to it. Yeah.
Well, and that's why that even your big two work can resonate because you understand that, I think. And that's what it is. It's this ongoing story. It's like a collective thing. And we all really, really get into it. So Jay Nunyon's got a super chat. Thank you. He goes, what is Bashan? I tried looking up what kind of monster he is. All I could find was a demon from India on Google. Any resources on Indian folklore? Obviously, we're talking about These Savage Shores. So
Bashan is a Rakshas, and Rakshasas are, they have many different descriptions and origin stories in Indian mythology. And Indian mythology is one of those kind of old school mythologies where if you ask 10 people to define a thing, they'll give you 10 different definitions, which kind of finds its way into the book as well, which is kind of why when he's asked about his origin, he keeps giving you a different origin story each time. But yeah, they're Rakshasas, and the story was actually born off of me reading about Rakshasas in Indian mythology, because they're usually described as these kind of demonic creatures that live in dark forests and pounce upon unsuspecting strangers and drink their blood. And I was going like, that's just a vampire. And then my brain went, okay, when were vampires first written about? And the first mention of a vampire, not Stoker, just a vampire in kind of European, Proto-European literature, the mention of a Rakshas in the Vedas predates the mention of a vampire by about 250 years.
Oh, for sure.
So I was just going like, okay, there's a story there. There's something there in the monster of the new versus the monster of the old and those ideologies, if you will.
Yeah, I know Brian had some ideas about the artwork, especially in These Savage Shores, right, Brian?
Well, yeah, but I'm glad you brought that up because I thought that was a really cool technique when I can't remember the woman's name, but when she was asking Bishan where did he come, it just became a ritual for them, and it was different every time. I thought that was really, really, really intriguing.
There's something romantic about not knowing. I think the older things get, the truly bigger mythologies, you get to these points where you're just like, that's just contradictory. They're supposed to be the same person, but they're described entirely, and that kind of stuff like feels really romantic, really interesting to me. And so I wanted to bring a little bit of like, this is Indian mythology. This is why it's beautiful.
Yeah. I mean because I did reread that past couple of days. And that, like Robbie, that was actually my first introduction to your work. And I mean, and kind of talking about how dense it is, like, that the first issue was one of the best first issues I think I've ever read. Because it, really set up a really good mystery and had a, very definitive action. And part of what I was asking about those layouts is that one fight when they came up on when that hunter found Pierre, Oliphant, the way that was structured, it was like, never seen the action go all these different directions, but it was one of the easiest things to follow,
Yeah. And a lot of that is to Sumit's credit as well, in that when it comes to the action scenes, like any amount of description for me is going to be disservice, because it's so much flow and movement. So usually I'll go like, Sumit, do whatever you want, but this guy punches this guy and then he throws him here. And then a couple of people come down and they light a fire and there's a ring of fire and now they're fighting inside the circle. So I'll usually give like an overview description to Sumit, and then I'll tell him, do whatever you want, but remember there's an underlying 9-panel grid sitting there. So good luck with that.
I was going to say, because like that type of action normally isn't in a 9-panel grid. I mean, 9-panel grids are, a lot of times for dialogue and, and pacing, and action, I don't know. I blew my mind.
Yeah, I think it's very possible to do action in even that 9-panel grid. And part of the reason that we did it that way, and Sumit wasn't sold on the idea of doing the whole book on a 9-panel grid, understandably, like what artist would be. But I went to him and I said, look, there's a reason to do this. So I want the whole thing to feel like it's on a metronome. I want people to hear this ta 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 thing going on in the background. So it never feels like the story is running wild or out of control. And so it almost feels devoid of any emotive reaction. And so if the story feels that way, I believe that readers will fill in that emotion by experiencing it themselves. And so that's kind of what we wanted to do. And when it came to action sequences, I still wanted that kind of metronome running in the background.
Yeah, that's awesome.
It blew me away initially because I was like, I've never read a book using the 9-panel grid that felt so free and spacious. And it really does. It doesn't really feel restricted, but you get the pace of it. And I think that's brilliant, because usually it feels like you're constricted when you're using the 9-panel grid. And like even in Tom King's Omega Men, he's using the 9-panel grid to show constriction and being, but you guys made it look so open and free and just.
But it's not the 9-panel grid that constricts you, to be honest. It's repetition within the 9-panel grid. Yeah. The more you start repeating shots, the more you start going from instant to instant to instant, then it's going to feel constricted. Instead, if you tell the story the way you want to tell it, don't repeat shots, but the panels are still constricting your sense of time, then you get that sense of like everything is flowing, but in a very measured way.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we were trying to achieve with the book. Going back to music references, like that's kind of the stuff that prog rock does, is you've got this sense of almost mathematical understanding of beats in the background, but you never, really good bands, you kind of forget that when you're listening to the music. And then once they come back to that sort of metronomic beats, when you realize like, oh, everything was in beat, everything was in time. And that's always exciting to me. So kind of wanted to do that with the comic as well.
That's awesome. We've talked a lot about your comic book influences. I want to shout out Dylan from Dylan's Horror Show, which, by the way, I'm the co-host. Everybody should check it out every Saturday night at 9:05 p.m. Central Time. he was really enamored, like I was when you first popped on, that you have a John Carpenter's The Thing poster behind you. It's one of my favorite movies ever. What are some of your favorite movies and movies that you think are definitely worth watching repeatedly?
This is a very difficult question because that list keeps changing all the time.
As it should.
So rather than talk about favorite movies, I'll tell you who my favorite directors are, because I watch movies by directors rather than. So I like, of the modern ones, I like David Fincher a lot. One of my favorite directors. I take a lot from Michael Mann, and so Heat and Miami Vice as well. Some of my favorite movies.
Station Rom. Michael Mann's one of my favorites.
Yeah. I take a lot from Alan Parker, who did. I think Mississippi Burning was him, and then he did Angel Heart as well, which is one of my favorite movies.
That's the De Niro film, Angel Heart?
Yeah, Mickey Rourke and Robert De Niro.
Yeah, I've never seen that one. I love Mississippi Burning, but I've never seen
Angel Heart's like a huge influence on Blue and Green.
Okay.
Yeah. And let's see, who else? Oh man, we'll be here all the whole time. I'll just keep picking. I mean, of course, they're all the greats, Scorsese, Coppola, all of those guys. But Takeshi Kitano, who's a Japanese director, is another favorite of mine. And Bong Joon-ho with his work on Parasite was amazing as well. So we'll just be here all night.
Yeah, we don't want to keep Rom here all night, so let's just say he's got good taste in film and cinema. Okay, we'll just say that. That's nice. That's good. This is the next Brian bit. Brian, what you got?
Okay. So I was real excited for the deluxe edition of GRAFITY'S WALL to come out. I hope I'm pronouncing that right.
I'm not sure at this point. I used to call it GRAFITY'S WALL, but I realized it's a weird way to pronounce it too. But I think it's supposed to be weird to pronounce it anyway. But yeah.
Okay, that's good. Okay. I did want to point out one of my favorite things about it was the deluxe edition was because you have a Ditcha writing about his process. So for any process people out there, his process on the lettering description in there was like, I learned a lot, just in that bit, and been a big fan of his work for a while too. One of my friends, he's got a 10-year-old daughter who was trying to get interested in the comics, and I just read that deluxe edition, so I recommended it to him, and he came back, and a couple weeks later, and he bought the edition and said she loved it and he loved it, and so he's asking me for more, and trying to get people into comics isn't always the easiest thing. I was wondering, do you have like other recommendations? Because now that I know this, I'm going to be pushing this one, because it's one of the best slice of life comics I've read. So
yeah. As far as recommendations, again, I think particularly GRAFITY'S WALL was influenced in a lot of ways by books like Tek on Kincrete, books like the Pluto Urasawa manga. So a lot of manga influence in there. Beyond that, I can't point to like specific influences on that book. I don't think about it too much. I just recommend like whatever I've read recently, and like, here, read this. It's amazing. I don't have like a specific list of books that I recommend to people who are reading. Like, I'm probably the worst. Like, I brought in a friend who had never read comics, and I said, here, take Watchmen, read it. It's amazing. Right. And he came back and he went like, what is this? I don't understand what's going on. And I realized that, you need to get used to that kind of spatial writing, thinking process. So, and then I gave him Lock and Key, which he really enjoyed. And he came back like, okay, I get how this works now. I think Lock and Key is another really good sort of entry recommendation to people, just because it's written in a very intuitive way. even though the story is complex and layered and goes all over the place, when you read every issue, it flows. It flows in your head as a cinematic experience rather than watching panels on a page. If you see what I mean.
Absolutely. These Savage Shores is one I've had a lot of success with recommending people. That and Friendo. I just base it on what I always usually ask people when they come into the shop and they want a recommendation. I'm like, what are your favorite movies? And then they'll tell me some things and I'll be like, oh, I got you. But I always wind up going mostly to White Noise, to be honest with you. So,
Well, that's good. I'm appreciative of that. And yeah, I think a lot of White Noise influence also comes from movies, to be honest. Like I know Dan, Alex, Ryan, they're all avid film watchers and connoisseurs. So I'm not surprised that you're linking it back to film in many ways. Like the idea for These Savage Shores actually came from doing that mythological research and watching a Tom Hardy TV show called Taboo and getting really annoyed at the way they were treating the part of the story that's supposed to have happened in Africa. So I'm like, no, I want to know that part of the story, not the part of the story where you came back.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. Where I got another question. I ask this of everybody. Have you ever seen lights in the sky that are strange? Have you ever seen ghosts? You ever had a paranormal experience? Do you have any ideas about aliens visiting Earth or extra dimensional activity? Any weird things like that ever happen to you, Ron?
Man, I live in that space. I kid you not. When I was younger and I was in school, one of my teachers called my mom for a conversation about me, and she said, like, I don't know, I think he needs some kind of help because he's always lost. He's always like never here 100%. He's always, daydreaming about something, pointing at things that aren't there. And I just had a really, really, really active imagination as a kid, and I kind of never grew out of it. So, there was that weird thing going around Twitter where people were like, close your eyes and imagine an apple. What do you see? Is it red or is it like a shape? No, I see like a full 3-dimensional, beautifully lit apple with like a side of it decaying, little pock marks that you get sometimes. And like one part of it is yellow because it's not ripened all the way to green to red. And so I've always had this ability to see things very vividly in my head. And, as a kid, I used to be really scared of the dark. And that continued for a really long time. And I realized it was because my reaction was to look at the dark and go like, what's there? Let's imagine what's there.
Yeah.
And I would just scare myself doing it. Yeah. So not quite supernatural experiences, but I think my brain's just open to going like, let's make this weird.
Yeah. Oh man, I love it. Yeah, same here. All right, the final Brian bit before we go. Brian, any final questions or thoughts?
Yeah. Well, I guess you want to put out your social media handles and things like that, or
I'm active only on one social media most of the time, which is Twitter, and so I'm the Right Rom on Twitter. I'm also Rom V Writes on Instagram, but that's mostly an update every couple of weeks and usually pictures of my dog. And then I have a website called rom-v.com, which I haven't updated in a really long time. So
follow him on Twitter. Follow him on Twitter, everybody. But more importantly, buy his books. His books are fantastic. I've recommended them so many times here on the channel. We talked about Radio Apocalypse. You also have, what is it? The Many Deaths of Layla Starr, right?
Yeah. Many Deaths of Layla Starr coming out from Boom, also out in April. And, that's, again, one of those ideas that's been in my head for a really long time. And it's basically, what if Death was fired from her job and had to live amongst the lowly mortals she's been reaping all this time, and had to learn about life and humanity that way after becoming immortal. And so I had that idea a really long time back. Just enamored with the idea of like the god of death being made powerless, and kind of being told that no, you're just a regular person now. And so I took that idea to Boom, and we built that into a story. I'm trying a new format thing with the comic as well, where we're going to tell you 5 stories. They're going to be 5 self-contained stories, but they're also part of like a greater narrative that you will put together as you read them. Yeah, awesome. I'm quite excited about that book, and Philippe Andrade is on the art, and Philippe is just amazing in what he's doing. I wish I could give you more sneak peeks, but Boom are pretty strict about that.
Yeah, I know. Trust me, I know. Boom, I know them. They're crazy. They're like, no, I'm just kidding. No, I'm really, really excited. This is it's got to be an exciting time for you. It's an exciting time for me because you are just pumping out so much great work. You got work at the big 2. And by the way, Rom's also writing Catwoman and his
Justice League Dark,
Dark, which Justice League Dark is amazing. But Catwoman, like one of your first Catwoman issues I read, you did the whole cha-cha-cha thing. And
right.
like, so all this talk about music and motion and movement and timing, and it all makes sense. And even Catwoman is a completely different book than everything else we've talked about, but still incredibly well done for what it is. So
yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. And you know, like I said earlier on when I was talking about genres, stories on a fundamental level work because of the same reasons. So it's pretty easy to then go like, okay, I'm going to tell the stories that I want to tell, but I'm going to scratch my street level gritty crime itch with this, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. So check out all of Rom's work because it's absolutely fantastic. It's absolutely amazing. He's got lots of exciting work coming up. Rom, once again, thank you so much for being here tonight. We really do appreciate it. Swamp Thing was amazing. I'm really excited for everything that's coming up in the future. And everybody does want to know real quick, though, what is your big 2 dream character? Now, real quick, I just want to go ahead and put this out into the world. I've already done this, but one of my dream books is a Superman book by you and Dan Mora. So just if, maybe you can mention that to the right people, maybe one day we can make that happen. But
I'll just send them the link to this. Make it happen, people.
And another one of my dreams is to actually read your Thor book that got canceled because of the COVID stuff. I really was very excited for that. But do you have a big character that you would like to work on that you haven't already?
To be honest, I think more about stories than character. And I get excited when I get a story that fits a character that's already there. That's how I think about it. So like, I don't think about a character and then go like, what story would I write for this character? No, I get a story idea and then I go, wait, how does this become part of the DCU? Which character fits this story idea? And so in that sense, I've got story ideas for some of the characters that I think would work really well. Like I'm talking to DC about an Aquaman book, and I've got a Batman idea at some point. And
bro, if you did Aquaman, I would just die. That would be so amazing.
Yeah, and I suppose so. So I suppose the closest we could get to a dream character that I haven't talked to anyone about at all, and it's probably one of those things that we'll get to at some point. Would be to do a Doctor Strange book and really delve into, people. They're like, oh, he gets his powers from this Buddhist Indian mythology adjacent gods. Like, I know what that place looks like. I know where those gods come from. I know that mythology, and I've never seen it explored. And there's fun things to do with that.
And woo. Man.
Yeah, you just made Brian very excited because Doctor Strange is one of his favorite characters. So there you go.
I'm a little speechless. Sorry. That would be amazing. I would love to read that.
Rom, thank you so much for being here. PCP Army, thank you for being here and being dream dolls like you usually are. We are dipping out. We appreciate it.